Welcome everyone to the stream. This will be a unique live stream. I haven't done anything like this before. This stream will be all about how to study Korean, how to learn Korean. Tips for how you can improve. If you are a beginner, what you can do to get started, or how you can learn faster. And if you're an intermediate or an advanced learner, we'll also talk about some tips for things like intonation or pronunciation, as well as how you can continue to improve when you're already at the level that you can have a full conversation. And the first thing we need to talk about, of course, is how to start learning Korean. There is a correct answer. Learn Hangul. If you cannot read this yet, you have not officially started learning Korean. And I say this with the most sincerity. If you do not know Hangul, you will not get very far. I know this many people who have gotten conversational at Korean by learning through romanization. Does that mean you should avoid resources that have romanization? If it's only romanization, I would say yes. Some resources provide both. I think that's fine. Learn the alphabet first. You will thank me. But knowing this will let you learn more than you can without it. Next, after you've learned the alphabet, I want you to follow a curriculum. Now, I am not saying follow my curriculum. I didn't use my curriculum when I learned Korean. Talk to Me in Korean did not exist. Which curriculum you use is actually less important than you think. I have a curriculum. Talk to Me in Korean has a free curriculum. The important thing about a curriculum is that a curriculum is going to teach you things in some order. It's not going to be introducing you to advanced concepts when you're still a beginner. The other thing, it's not going to be teaching you the same thing multiple times. If you're learning by yourself with videos, you would be surprised how many times you had to relearn the exact same thing over and over again, because when you first learned it, there wasn't enough material for you to really grasp how it's used or to practice making it on your own. So you want a curriculum that's not going to repeat the same lesson over and over again. Anything that's not a curriculum should be used as supplementary. Anything that's not a curriculum is a supplementary resource. These things are never going to be what teaches you grammar. Now, this would be amazing if they did, but imagine if BTS made a K-pop song that taught Korean grammar. They had like a song about the yo form. They'd be like, I can't sing. I'm not, just imagine it. It's going to be better than me trying to do it. No, that's never going to happen, unfortunately. These are supplementary. They are wonderful. They can always teach you little things. Grammar points, sometimes, phrases, natural speech. Great. They're not going to teach you grammar. They are not going to teach you anything in order or avoid repetition. Just keep that in mind. Now, I said curriculum. That doesn't have to be a textbook. Textbooks are a good way you can do it on your own. But what else could give you a curriculum? If you have a tutor or you're taking a class. But not a lot of schools offer Korean classes. You might not be able to afford having a tutor every single day. Textbooks tend to be the best resource that you can get these days because of that. Again, there are free options out there. Don't think that I'm telling you you have to spend lots of money and buy all of my books to become good at Korean. No, you do not need any money to learn Korean. You just need lots of time. Next thing I want to talk about. If you're a beginner, I want you to focus on simpler, boring topics. So you know that expression that people say, learn like a child. It's the easiest way you can learn. And that's true, but what are children learning? Are children learning how to express their opinions on the Korean War? No! Kids are learning goo goo gaga, give me the ball. The plane is blue. Oh, sky! Boring topics. These are the foundations that will allow you to discuss on any topic you'd like. But you cannot have a conversation about why you love BTS until you can say the word, I like BTS. Things like the colors, numbers, counting, how to say the day and the time, conjugating verbs, politeness levels. These basic boring things will allow you to make more complicated stuff. Next, you want to focus on grammar before vocabulary. So I don't mean that vocabulary is not important. It's very important, and as you learn more and more Korean, vocabulary will become more and more important. But as a beginner, the most important thing is grammar. I could give you the ability to stop time, Quicksilver or that guy in Avengers, or the Flash, I guess they're all kind of the same, and hand you a dictionary and let you come up with any sentence you want and try to speak Korean, and you would not be able to have a conversation. You need grammar to have a conversation. When you have the grammar, vocab is just putting the block in the right hole. Focus on grammar before you start focusing on vocabulary. If you know basic grammar, you will be able to learn vocabulary much more easily. Make sure you know how you saw every vocabulary word when you write it down. If you want to learn the word for giraffe, don't just learn the word kirin, because you might learn it for now, but when you actually want to say it in a conversation, it's not going to come to your head. You need the word right away. And in order to do that, you have to have a lot of context with that word so your brain knows it's actually important. Always learn vocabulary with context. So if you see the word giraffe used in a sentence and you want to learn that word, pay attention to the whole sentence. Don't just pull out that one word. That's why grammar is so important, because you're not going to be able to learn that vocabulary word without understanding the context it's being used in. This is the most important tip you're going to get today. Practice speaking. Your live streams, Billy, are always so full of information. You can practice speaking Korean before you can speak Korean. You don't even need to understand what they're saying to practice speaking, because I didn't say practice listening. I said practice speaking. You just need to speak. You just need to move your mouth. Your Korean in the beginning is going to be very bad. You're not going to pick up one of my books, read a few pages, and you're like, I get it. No. The whole point of learning Korean is to communicate. Every single person I know got to where they did by speaking a lot and speaking early. How do you get practice speaking? You can have Korean friends, but not everyone has Korean friends. So if you don't have friends, the next best option is online. These are good ways you can find friends, but these don't guarantee you're going to have someone to practice Korean with. Because think about it. On the other end of this is a Korean who wants to learn English. So you're trying to learn Korean and you know maybe basic Korean or intermediate Korean. Koreans start learning English from elementary school, so even if they can't speak it well, they know far more than the average beginner learning Korean. How else do you get friends? Pay for a tutor. This can get very expensive. There are two websites, however. Italki, you can do community tutors. Say Speaking has retired Korean teachers with like 30 years of experience, but you pay for it. Italki community tutors can be as low as like $8 an hour. The point isn't that you learn Korean from a native. The benefit of a tutor, a native Korean tutor, is that you have someone to practice speaking with who you're paying to listen to you practice their language. They're not going to leave. They're not going to give up and just speak English. You are paying them. When I learned Korean, I was in Korea. I spoke very poorly for months. I was bad. But you would have heard me speaking Korean a lot. Get someone you can practice speaking with. Whether you pay for it or get it for free on a pen pal website, you need someone to practice speaking Korean with. Next tip. Keep a study schedule. Just write down what days you study Korean and what days you don't, and keep that schedule. Don't try to make any crazy big goals. If you mess one up, it's going to really hurt your motivation. So let me give you an example. You write down on your calendar, Monday through Friday, study Korean on each day. You also write down 1 hour. If you miss an hour on one day, make it up the next day, or try to make it up in advance if you know that you can't do it. That's a study schedule. You know you're going to be studying Korean on that day, and you keep it. If you don't have a study schedule, are you going to study during those days? You might, but if you do make a study schedule, there's a higher chance you're actually going to do it. Now, I said don't use these as your main resource, but this is still useful. If you listen to K-dramas and podcasts, you're still improving your Korean in some ways. You're adjusting your brain to the sounds of Korean. So these sorts of resources are great for supplementary resources because they get your brain accustomed to what Korean sounds like. However, remember that entertainment is 100% input. Input is never practice. Nobody learns how to speak Korean by watching Korean dramas all day. I wish that were possible. Even if you were to spend 10,000 hours doing input, you're not going to be able to have a conversation. The U.S. Foreign Service Institute, which is the U.S.'s branch for foreign language education, they said it takes 2,200 hours of classroom studying to get fluent at Korean, and that's 88 weeks. So keep that in mind. Input is never practice. What is the most important part of a study notebook? When you write that information down the first time, and as your notebooks get bigger and bigger, it's going to become harder and harder to locate notes that you made. The most important thing you can do with your study notebook is just write things down in it. If you learn something new, take notes about it. When you see it used again, write it down again. The more senses you can involve in your learning, the better you'll remember something. You've probably heard something like that before. If you just hear something, that's not going to help you memorize it. But if you hear it and then you say it and you write it down and you smell it, your brain's going to remember it much better. Writing it down is one of those sensory things that helps you to remember it. You're hearing it, you say it out loud, you write it down, your hands are actually moving, you look at yourself writing it, you're reading that again out loud in your head. Get a good dictionary. There are some really good dictionaries. There is Naver Dictionary and National Institute of Korean Language, or in Korean, this is known as 국립국어원. They also made a Korean Learner's Dictionary a few years ago. It's really good. These are both free. Just have a dictionary you can use for reference. And if you're not sure about how to use a word, click the example sentence button, and that will tell you how that word actually is used and what it means. Let's go on to some general tips for studying Korean. Maybe once every month, take a step back and think about how you're using your time for studying Korean. Not how much time you're studying Korean, but also how are you using that time? If you're studying Korean for 30 minutes a day, you tell yourself, what are you doing during those 30 minutes that would actually constitute studying? That was just a reminder. Also, when you learn grammar rules, that might not be the most natural or even the most common way that Koreans speak, because every situation is different. You need context. One example is I can teach you about the 니다 form. For example, 이다 becomes 입니다, or 하다 becomes 합니다. If you go to Korea today, if you're speaking with your friends in Korea, there's like a less than 1% chance you're ever going to be exposed to those forms. Now, does that mean that they're not real? No, they're commonly used, but they're not going to be in these sorts of situations, like everyday casual conversations or just talking with friends. So grammar is important, but I will say don't try to learn all of your Korean solely from grammar books. And as you get better Korean, this will become more and more important. When you're a beginner, just learn grammar because you won't be able to understand this yet. As soon as you've learned all of the grammar basics, focus more on real Korean, not just grammar. Grammar lessons are still useful for learning new topics, but when you're practicing that grammar, try to focus on how is that grammar actually used in real Korean. I'll give you an example. You might learn the grammar form 법이다. It is an advanced grammar form. In real Korean, most of the time when this form is actually used in regular everyday day-to-day Korean conversations, it's usually used when you're quoting some kind of special phrase like a special saying or a proverb. It's important to keep an eye open for how grammar forms actually get used in real Korean, because even though you can learn something, what it means, Koreans in their natural speech might only use it a few different ways. On the other hand, don't only try to focus on how Koreans speak, because then you'll never understand the grammar that they're using. So learn grammar, but don't be too reliant on grammar forms by themselves. Everyone, I want to know, what is your goal for learning Korean? Write it down in the chat. I want to know, what do you guys have as your main goal? Just have a goal. Have something, a main goal that you can hold on to. And it's okay if that goal changes over time. Just have something. Make sure you're enjoying whatever you're using, because if you don't enjoy it, it's going to be really hard to keep motivation. So try to enjoy what you're learning. That could be trying to find extra Korean entertainment that you enjoy, experimenting with different hobbies that are related to learning Korean, or maybe just try finding a group for a hobby that you like that has Koreans in it, or people that speak Korean. Anything to keep the experience more fun. You don't want it to become boring. You don't want learning Korean to become a chore. There is such a thing as active learning and passive learning. Passive learning is anything that you're doing without any effort on your own. This would be things like watching Korean dramas in the background, or watching Korean dramas with subtitles. Anything that just happens without any effort is passive learning. Passive learning is fine, but it's not studying. It's input. It's never output. Active learning, however, is anything where you are actively working to learn from that resource. So this would be reading grammar lessons, practicing making sentences, practicing speaking, watching Korean dramas without subtitles. You can pause and look up words, but you're not watching it just to watch the content, you're watching it to study. Listening to a podcast and focusing on what they're saying. That is active learning. So focus on active learning. Nobody learns Korean in their sleep. Next thing, this tip is from my friend Hyunwoo. Learning Korean is not a race. You are not competing against anyone else. You cannot compare yourself with someone else learning Korean. Try to be better than yesterday. You are only competing with yourself. You know how you're learning. just try to be a little bit better than yesterday. If you're just consistent in your learning, you will improve. One note about translating things. Give up the notion that you can translate one-to-one and accept that your sentences are going to be different in both languages. Now, this makes things really frustrating for beginners, and it was frustrating for me too, when I wanted to say something like, I'm starving. And I would ask Koreans, how can I say like, not just I'm really hungry, I'm starving. And they would say, oh, you can say, 배고파 죽겠다. Literally, I am so hungry, I will die. What's starving? And I looked it up in my dictionary. 굶다. 굶다 is to starve. 굶고 있어요. I am starving. So if you're learning Korean and you're like, how can I say I'm starving? And someone says, 너무 배고파. It's not exactly what you wanted to say in English, but it will never be. This is just kind of like a reminder that nothing will work one-to-one in Korean. There are other ways you could say it too, but none will match exactly with what the English sentence conveys. Okay, thinking in Korean. You can actually think in Korean right now. You can practice thinking in Korean throughout the day. Pretending I'm a beginner. I'm in my room. What do I see? I see a light. I know the word light is 불. So I can say, I'm thinking. 여기 불이 있어요. 여기도 불이 있어요. Okay, there's also a light here. I want to say the ceiling is high. I don't know how to say ceiling, so I just say 여기가 높아요. Here is high. You know, you're not going to be speaking very well in the beginning, but the point is that it doesn't matter. The point is that you are practicing using your language. And thinking in Korean is using the language. You can think in Korean throughout the day, as much as you want or as little as you want. You can just point to something. It's a book. You can say 책. 책이에요. 벽이에요. It's a wall. 벽. How I was when I was a beginner. 벽이 까만색이에요. The wall is a black, you know? You can do the best you can, but try to think in Korean. Just be aware that there is such a thing as literary Korean versus spoken Korean. Spoken Korean will be things that you would encounter if you watch variety shows, or podcasts, or just talking with your friends. Where are you going to find literary Korean? Well, first of all is books. You're also going to find literary Korean in K-dramas. People don't actually speak the way that they do in Korean dramas or in books because they're written. The author had time to craft what he wants the character to say exactly versus spoken, which is just what comes out. Just be aware that there is such a thing as literary Korean and spoken Korean. So something might be correct, literary, but it might not sound very spoken, and vice versa. You're not going to see things like, and then like he was like, no way, written in a book or in a K-drama. And you're also not going to see something like, I do presume, I say, that the killer was Colonel Mustard. You're not going to see that spoken with your friends or in a variety show or on a podcast. Next, okay, so that was the beginner tips. Next, let's go up to some specific tips. I want to give you guys some tips for improving your pronunciation and your intonation. First, increase your exposure to Korean. Just listen to more Korean. Of course, active studying will still be better, but even passive studying will still help your pronunciation just by getting your brain used to these sounds. Next thing that you should do, record yourself speaking Korean. You probably have no idea how you actually sound when you're speaking Korean. That's normal because you normally don't hear the way that you sound to other people. Or if you don't want to even record yourself, if you want to know how you sound to someone else, cup your ears when you talk, like some alien creature, until it starts echoing. This is what your voice sounds like to other people. Also, this is also really important. Speak louder. If your voice is quiet, you're not going to be able to hear how well you're pronouncing things or how poorly you're pronouncing things. If you can't hear your own voice very well, your brain is going to have a really hard time adjusting the way that you're speaking to match what it thinks Korean should be sounding like. That will help your pronunciation. Okay, next thing, relax. Relax your lips. Relax your mouth when you're speaking and push more air out. By speaking louder, I don't just mean like trying to sound like you're yelling. So I'll give you an example. If someone has pronunciation like this, 안녕하세요. Okay, first of all, we're gonna make it a little louder. 안녕하세요. Relax your lips a bit. 안녕하세요. That's actually a good step to take. And instead, compensate for that relaxing by adding more air to what you're saying. 안녕하세요. Now, we're not perfect yet, but we're getting there. With practice, then you'll be able to say 안녕하세요. Koreans are not saying 안녕하세요, 반갑습니다. No one says that. Try to move your lips less. And you might think that you're smashing things together, but that's really what Koreans do too. That's what Korean ends up sounding like, is that your Korean gets more mushed together. And that also leads to beginners getting confused about, why does this sound like this? Why are they saying 안녕하세요, but it sounds like 안녕하세요? Why are they saying 안녕하세요? What's that? That's all that they're doing. When Koreans relax their mouths and say 안녕하세요, it becomes 안녕하세요. And you've probably heard this sound too before. 안녕하세요. Does it sound like 안녕하세요 quickly? No, it is 안녕하세요 relaxed. 안녕하세요. You're just relaxing your mouth with more air. 안녕하세요. 안녕하세요. The next tip I have for improving your intonation might be the most useful, and that is shadowing. What it is you become a copycat of someone that you're listening to or someone you're watching. So the way you do it is you find a bunch of clips of one person. This should be someone who matches the voice tone that you want. The idea is you become a copycat of that person. And if you're copying the way that that person says stuff and you do it enough, you're going to end up saying those phrases kind of like that person does. What you do is you find a bunch of clips of that person. This could be a TV show. Typically, variety shows work great for this. Somewhere you can clearly pick up everything that they're saying. So you don't want this to be in a drama with loud music and stuff like that, or on a song with background sounds and drums. You want to be able to clearly hear what they're saying. So I recommend things like variety shows for that. And then try to repeat what they say exactly how they say it. So if you watch a variety show and the character says, 그런 법이 어딨어? Pause it. 그런 법이 어딨어? And you play it again. You play that clip over and over until you feel like you're matching not just their pronunciation, but their intonation, the way they're saying it, the amount of volume they're using it, maybe the expression on their face even. You want to copy exactly the way that they do that. And you don't need to do shadowing to get good intonation. But instead, if you can't, you'll need to have a lot more exposure to Korean. So usually you'd have to live in Korea or you'd have to be speaking Korean all the time. For everyone who's been intermediate and advanced and waiting patiently, now I have some tips for you. When you started studying Korean, you were so excited and motivated to learn Korean, right? The first day you knew 5 words. And the next day you studied another 20 words. So now you knew 25 words. You have improved 500% in one day. You could easily see an improvement. However, now, today, you know 4,000 words and you study 20 new words today. You're still learning a lot of new words. You just learned 20 new words today. Now you know 4,020. Are you going to feel any sort of improvement on that? You cannot feel that improvement when you already know so much. In fact, you might even be improving a lot more because when you learn these 20 words now, you can actually use them versus when you were a beginner, you were just learning them as words. So just remember that even if you're not able to sense that you're improving, you are still improving. So I wanted to give you a tip for that. Something you can do to judge how you're improving is once a month, record a video of yourself speaking in Korean for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Keep this to yourself. Just talk about your day or anything you want. You're not going to notice much of a difference day to day, or maybe even week to week, or sometimes month to month studying Korean. But I guarantee you, if you pull up a video clip from 6 months ago or a year ago of you speaking Korean and play that side by side, you're easily going to hear a difference in how you speak Korean if you're continuing to study. For me, I have the benefit of having started a YouTube channel 8 years ago. I can pull up the clips of me speaking Korean. I have the original files when I recorded the lessons of me speaking Korean. And yeah, I can clearly hear my Korean's gotten better since when I started my YouTube channel. That's my recommendation for intermediates and advanced, just so you'll have something to reference when you're wondering if you've actually gotten better or not. The other way to improve as an intermediate or advanced learner is you have to increase your study time dramatically. When you're a beginner, you can spend 20 minutes and now you can learn 10 words. You can learn how to say hello, goodbye, thank you, how are you? When you're an advanced speaker or an intermediate speaker, it takes a long time to learn new things. You might spend 20 minutes learning how to use one new grammar form and making a few example sentences for it, and then you still can't really use it yourself. You need a lot more study time to improve faster than you did when you were a beginner. You might need multiple hours per day of input. Don't just increase how much time you're using a textbook. Increase your organic study time. So increase how much time you're speaking with friends. Increase how much time you're actively listening to Korean dramas, or how much time you're actively reading, actively listening, watching dramas without subtitles. Anything that's active learning, increase that. Organic. Real stuff. This is what you need to get fluent at Korean. Increase how much time you're spending doing these sorts of things. So this is the fun kind of studying. It's active, but it's still going to be entertaining to you because it's organic, not just textbook study. And this is the same for no matter what level you're at. Practice speaking. As an intermediate speaker, and even more so as an advanced speaker, you can speak. Doesn't mean you're going to be fluent, but intermediate, you should be able to hold a conversation, although simply, slowly, sure. Practice speaking more than you have before, because now you can say a lot more things than you could as a beginner. You should be practicing speaking from early on, but now you can actually practice having conversations. Do this much more than you think you need. You could practice speaking all day for 6 hours a day. And it could still take you a year to become really comfortable speaking in Korean, depending on who you're speaking with and what sort of things you're talking about. If you're only able to do like 20 minutes of speaking practice a day, just don't be surprised when it takes a long time before you start seeing improvement in yourself. So yeah, more speaking practice, the better. I can give you a suggestion. If you're advanced, if you're able to speak in Korean, although slowly if you can speak, why don't you just open a YouTube channel and just stream yourself speaking in Korean? You don't have to teach Korean. Don't do that unless you actually know what you're talking about. You can just open a YouTube channel and just stream yourself speaking. Doesn't matter if anyone comes. Speak in Korean. Someone comes in, speaks English, doesn't matter. Reply to them in Korean. You are in Korean mode. Try it. It's fun. I've done it before. If you open it, Koreans will come. That is all of our tips today for the lesson. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. 그럼 다음에 또 봐.